The final statement in the last video was not based on emotions, but rather on factual evidences. Landfills and dump sites in the USA and the UK were rapidly increasing and filled with waste with significant amounts being disposed inland. By the end of the 20th century, neither country could be considered as waste management leader anymore. Personally, and from my research, I believe that Europe was the new waste management leader that picked the fight against waste accumulation and landfills. This fight started from the last quarter of the 20th century. But before I bother you with all these details, let's first examine the municipal solid waste status in Europe by exploring the data on municipal solid waste that is available in the Central Statistics Bureau in Europe, which is Eurostat. We will pick the data from 1995, which is the oldest confirmed data available on this site. In 1995, around 231 million tons of municipal solid waste were generated in 30 countries that submitted audit results. Germany alone produced 51 million tons, accounting for around 22% of the total waste generated. France followed with just over 28 million tons, or 12% of the total waste generated. When combined, countries like Germany, Spain, France, Italy, Poland, and Turkey produced together over 163 million tons of municipal solid waste, which is 70% of the total waste generated in Europe. Now, however, we need to note that some leading European countries were making significant progress back then in waste diversion and landfill avoidance. For example, let's look at the 30 countries together, and we will find that combined they managed to divert 61% of the total generated municipal solid waste. The Czech Republic, Greece, Cyprus, and Lithuania produced just over 8 million tons, which is an insignificant percentage of 0.035% of the total generated in Europe. But back then, they reported zero waste sent to landfills. Additionally, Estonia, Italy, Poland, and Portugal were able back then to divert more than 90% of the total generated municipal solid waste. When combined, the 8 countries diverted 46.8 million tons, or just over 20% of the total generated MSW back then. And while these numbers have improved since the end of the first waste management evolutionary phase in the 70s, they were of course still far from being satisfactory, particularly if we talk about the big 5 countries that were leading the industrial boom at that time. In response to this challenge, the European leaders took a proactive approach but through the European Council and the European Parliament. For those who are not aware who these two structures are, or what these two structures are and what they do, let me explain briefly. The European Council is responsible for setting the European Union's political agenda and represents the highest level of political cooperation between member countries. It determines the overall direction and the priorities of the European Union, but it does not have the power to pass laws. Instead, it deals with complex or sensitive issues that cannot be resolved at lower level of intergovernmental cooperation. On the other side, the European Parliament has been granted the legislative powers, including the adoption of the European Union legislation in collaboration with the Council of the European Union. It also reviews the work program of the European Commission and can request proposals for legislation. Waste management laws in the European Union are communicated through the so-called directives, which are considered binding laws for all the member states unless an exception is granted. In this video, I will provide a summary of the relevant directives in chronological order, starting from the oldest, ending with the newest. The first directive is the Directive 75/442/EEC of July the 16th, 1975 on waste. This directive provides a definition of waste, as mentioned in the previous video, if you remember, and requires member states to take appropriate steps to prevent waste generation, encourages recycling and processing of waste, and extracting recyclables and energy. It also instructs member states to ensure that waste is disposed of safely and without harm to human health or to the environment. Member states, according to this directive, are further directed to ensure that waste is either handled by a private or public collector or disposed of properly by the holder himself. This directive also states that all waste management infrastructure must comply with the environmental requirements and be regularly inspected by the designated authority in each country. The cost of waste disposal, minus any proceeds from the treatment, is the responsibility of the holder in accordance with the polluter pays principle. The second is the Directive 91/156/EEC of March 18th, 1991. It is amending the previous directive on waste. And the main objective of this directive is to prevent or reduce waste production and its harmful effects. And this is to be achieved through the development of clean technologies that use natural resources more efficiently. Rethinking the design and manufacturing of products to avoid depletion of natural resources and pollution was also introduced in this directive for the first time. In addition to implementing the appropriate technologies for the final disposal of hazardous substances found in the waste intended for recovery. It also includes promoting the reuse or reclamation of waste material and using waste as a source of energy in the recycling process. The directive also requires each member state to establish a comprehensive waste permitting and reporting system, with reports to be submitted to the central authorities of the European Union. Additionally, member states are required to designate a competent authority responsible for the implementation of this directive. The third is Directive 94/62/EC of December 20th, 1994 on packaging and packaging waste. This directive aims to regulate measures to reduce the use of packaging and its negative impact on the environment. And one of the recommended measures to minimize this type of waste is the implementation of a take-back policy. The main provision of this directive include new recycling targets to be achieved by end of 2025, which is 65% of packaging and packaging waste, and by the end of 2030, at least 70. The specific recycling targets to be met by 31st of December 2025 are 50% for plastics, 25% for wood, 70% for ferrous metals, 50% for aluminium, 70% for glass, and 75% for paper and cardboard. And by 31st December 2030, the recycling rates should increase to 55% for plastics, 30% for wood, 80% for ferrous metals, 60% for aluminium, 75% for glass, and 85% for paper and cardboard. It is important to note that recycling rate for each category should not fall below 30%. Additionally, the directive requires all participants to increase the use of reusable packaging. The fourth is Directive 1999/31/EC of April 26, 1999 on the landfill of waste. This directive focuses on the management of waste in landfills. It emphasizes the need for control and monitoring systems for landfills and categorizes these landfills based on the type of waste they receive. The main provisions of this directive are as follows. First, member states are required to develop a national strategy to reduce the amount of biodegradable waste sent to landfills. This strategy should include measures as composting, biogas production, and material or energy recovery to achieve the set target. The initial target was to reduce the bio waste to 15% of the total amount generated over a period of 15 years, but it was later on amended to become 75% to be achieved by 2008. The second is each European Union member must establish a system for issuing permits for each batch of waste to be landfilled. The third is the directive mandates that the waste generators bear all the costs associated with the life cycle of the landfill, not only the cost of the operations to landfill, but the full life cycle, which is in line with the polluter pays principle. The last one is the national laws and regulations must be amended in each member state in accordance with this directive. The fifth is the Directive 2000/76/EC of December 2000 on the incineration of waste. This directive recognizes incineration for the first time as one of the key technologies for waste minimization, while meeting the emission criteria that limit levels of nitrogen oxides or NOx and sulfur oxides, SOx, and heavy metals. Only non-recyclable waste is permitted to be incinerated according to this directive. And this directive sets out clear technological and technical recommendations for the operation of waste incineration, such as licensing, critical operating parameters, organization of operation, and preparation of its protocols. The sixth is Regulation number 2150/2002 of November 25th, 2002 on waste statistics. This regulation obliges all European Union member states to review the activities of the Waste Management Organization, keep accurate records, and publish all the relevant data in the online European statistics database, which is Eurostat. The seventh directive is the Directive 2004/35/CE of April 21st, 2004 on environmental liability with regard to the prevention and remedying of environmental damage. This directive focuses on pollution prevention rather than remedying its consequences. The directive is based on the same polluter pays principle as the main pillar of the remediation of all contaminated sites. The public authorities in each member state are obliged by this directive to achieve a proper elimination of the consequences of accidents, and according to this directive, each European Union member state is obliged to designate a competent authority for its implementation. The last directive is Directive 2008/98/EC of November the 19th, 2008 on waste and repealing certain directives. I would consider this directive as the foundation of the waste management because it provides specific definition to terms such as prevention, recovery, recycling, and disposal. The directive also identifies new waste management participants, including waste traders, which are parties that buy or sell waste even if they do not take direct possession of it, and also brokers, which is parties that physically carry out the waste treatment and disposal on behalf of the waste generator. Additionally, this directive mandates the separate collection of waste for the first time and introduces a new hierarchy for waste management with focus on the prevention and minimization of waste through various measures such as reuse, recovery, and recycling. I would summarize the main principles that are outlined in this direction as follows. The first, the best practice for waste management is to prevent its formation. Second, priority is given to reusing and recycling of products, including the use of alternative fuels and energy production from the remaining waste. Third, disposal is the last resort. Fourth, the traceability and accountability for all waste management operators is vital. Fifth, member states should incorporate these directives provisions into their laws and report on its implementation. Sixth, a new practice of understanding the life cycle of products would allow for components to move between different levels of hierarchy in the interest of the environment and the economy. Seventh, the term end of waste is defined as the point at which the product ceases to be waste and components extended product liability for producers of products that generate waste after use. The eighth, two main goals are to be achieved by 2020. The preparation for reuse and recycling of up to 50% of glass, paper, metals, and plastics. Second is the reuse and recycling of up to 70% of other material for backfill and other purposes. The last is separate collection of bio-waste for anaerobic and aerobic treatment before use or disposal is from now on mandatory.